Ranade, Gandhi and Jinnah by Babasaheb Ambedkar. 6. His greatest opponents, however, came from the political school of the intelligentsia. These politicals developed new thesis. According to that thesis, political reform was to have precedence over social reform. The thesis was argued from platform to platform and was defended by eminent people like Mr. Justice Telang, a judge of the Bombay High Court with the consummate skill of an acute lawyer. The thesis caught the imagination of the people. If there was one single cause to which the blocking of the social reform movement could be attributed, it was this cry of political reform. The thesis is unsupportable, and I have no doubt that the opponents of Ranade were wrong, and in pursuing it did not serve the best interests of the country. The grounds on which Mr. Justice Telang defended the politician's thesis was of course logical. But he totally forgot that logic is not reason and analogy is not argument. Neither did he have a correct understanding of the interrelation between the social and the political which Ranade had. Let us examine the reasons for the thesis. Those that have advanced were not very impressive. But I am prepared to meet the most impressive arguments that could be advanced. Even then the thesis will not stand. The following strike me as being the most impressive. In the first place, it could be said that we want political power first because we want to protect the rights of the people. This answer proceeds from a very frugal theory of government as was propounded by the American statesman Jefferson, according to whom politics was only an affair of policing by the state so that the rights of people were maintained without disturbance. Assume that the theory is a sound one. The question is, what is there for the state to police if there are no rights? Rights must exist before policing becomes a serious matter of substance. The thesis that political reform should precede social reform becomes on the face of it an absurd proposition unless the idea is that the government is to protect those who have vested rights and to penalize those who have none. The second ground that could be urged in support of the thesis is that they wanted political power because they wanted to confer on each individual certain fundamental rights by law, and that such conferring of the political rights would not take place unless there was political power first obtained. This, of course, sounds very plausible, but is there any substance in it? The idea of fundamental rights has become a familiar one since their enactment in the American Constitution and in the Constitution framed by revolutionary France. The idea of making a gift of fundamental rights to every individual is no doubt very laudable. The question is how to make them effective. The prevalent view is that once rights are enacted in a law, then they are safeguarded. This again is an unwarranted assumption. As experience proves, rights are protected not by law, but by the social and moral conscience of society. If society and social conscience is such that it is prepared to recognize the laws which law chooses to enact, rights will be safe and secure. But if the fundamental rights are opposed by the community, no law, no parliament, no judiciary can guarantee them in the real sense of the word. What is the use of the fundamental rights to the blacks in America, to the Jews in Germany, and to the untouchables in India? As Berkey said, there is no method found for punishing the multitude. Law can punish a single solitary recalcitrant criminal. It can never operate against a whole body of people who are determined to defy it. Social conscience, to use the language of Coleridge, that calm, incorruptible legislature of the soul without whom other powers would meet in mere occupancy, is the only safeguard of all rights, fundamental or non-fundamental. The third argument of the politicians could be based on the right to self-government. That self-government is better than good government is a well-known cry. One cannot give it more value than one can give to a slogan, and all would like to be assured that self-government would also be a good government. There is no doubt that the politicians wanted good government and their aim was to establish a democratic form of government. But they never stopped to consider whether a democratic form of government was possible. Their contention was founded in a series of fallacies A democratic form of government presupposes a democratic form of society. The formal framework of democracy is of no value and would indeed be a misfit if there is no social democracy. The politicians never realized that democracy was not a form of government. It was essentially a form of society. It may not be necessary for a democratic society to be marked by unity, by community of purpose, by loyalty to public ends, and by mutuality of sympathy. But it does unmistakably involve two things. The first is an attitude of mind, an attitude of respect and equality towards their fellows. The second is a social organization free from rigid social barriers. Democracy is incompatible and inconsistent with isolation and exclusiveness, resulting in the distinction between the privileged and the unprivileged. Unfortunately, the opponents of Ranade were never able to realize the truth of this fact. One may judge it by any test, and it will be found that the stand that Ranade took in this controversy and his plan of work were correct and fundamental too, if they were not the prerequisites of political reform. Ranade argued that there were no rights in the Hindu society which the moral sense of man could recognize. There were privileges and disabilities, privileges for a few and disabilities for the vast majority. Ranade struggled to create rights. Ranade wanted to vitalize the conscience of the Hindu society, which had become moribund as well as morbid. Ranade aimed to create a real social democracy without which there could be no sure and stable politics. The conflict was between two opposing points of view, and it centered around the question which is more important for the survival of a nation, political freedom or strong moral fiber. Ranade took the view that moral stamina was more important than political freedom. This was also the view of Lecky, the great historian, who after a careful and comparative study of history came to the conclusion that the foundation of a nation's strength and prosperity is laid in pure domestic life, in commercial integrity, in a high standard of moral worth and of public spirit, in simple habits, in courage, uprightness, and a certain soundness and moderation of judgment which springs quite as much from character as well as from intellect. If you would form a wise judgment of the future of a nation, observe carefully whether these qualities are increasing or decaying. Observe carefully what qualities count for most in public life. Is character becoming of greater or lesser importance? Are the men who obtain the highest posts in the nation men of whom in private life, irrespective of party competent judges, speak with genuine respect? Are they of sincere convictions, consistent lives, and indisputable integrity? It is by observing this current that you can best cast the horoscope of a nation. Ranade was not only wise, but he was also logical. He told his opponents against playing the part of political radicals and social dons. In clear and unmistakable terms, he warned them, saying, "Liberal by halves. You cannot be liberal in politics and conservative in religion. The heart and the heart must go together. You cannot cultivate your intellect, enrich your mind, enlarge the sphere of your political rights and privileges, and at the same time keep your hearts closed and cramped. It is an idle dream to expect men to remain enchained and enshackled in their own superstition and social evils while they are struggling hard to win rights and privileges from the rulers. Before long, these vain dreamers will find their dreams lost." Experience has shown that these words of Ranade have been true, even prophetic. Let those who deny this consider. Where are we today in politics, and why are we where we are? It is now 50 years since the National Congress was born. Its stewardship has passed hands, I won't say from the sane to the insane or from realists to idealists, but from moderates to radicals. Where does the country stand today at the end of 50 years of political marching? What is the cause of this deadlock? The answer is simple. The cause of deadlock is the absence of communal settlement. Ask why is communal settlement necessary for political settlement, and you realize the fundamental importance of the stand that Ranade took. For the answer to this question is to be found in the wrong social system, which is too undemocratic, too overweight in favor of the classes and against the masses, too class conscious, and too communally minded. Political democracy would become a complete travesty if it were built upon its foundations. That is why nobody except the high caste Hindus will agree to make it the case of a political democracy without serious adjustments. Well, may some people argue to their satisfaction that the deadlock is the creation of the British government. People like to entertain thoughts which soothe them and which throw responsibility on others. This is the psychology of escapism. But it cannot alter the fact that it is the defects of social system which has given rise to the communal problem and which has stood in the way of India getting political power. Ranade's aim was to cleanse the old order if not to build a new one. He insisted on improving the moral tone of Hindu society. If he had been heard and followed, the system would have at least lost its rigors and its rigidity. If it could not have avoided communal settlement, it would have made it easy. For his attempts, limited as they were, would have opened the way to mutual trust. But the politicians had developed a passion for political power which had so completely blinded them that they refused to see virtue in anything else. Ranade had had his revenge. Is not the grant of political safeguard a penalty for denying the necessity of social reform? How much did Ranade achieve in the field in which he played so dominant a part? In a certain sense, the question is not very important. Achievement is never the true measure of greatness. Alas, as Carlyle said, we know very well that ideals can never be completely embodied in practice. Ideals must ever lie a very great way off, and we will right thankfully content ourselves with any not intolerable approximation thereto. Let no man, as Schiller says, too lawlessly measure by a scale of perfection the meager product of reality. In this poor world of ours, we will esteem him no wise man, we will esteem him a sickly, discontented, foolish man. And yet, Ranade's record of achievement was not altogether bare. The problems facing the then social reformers contained in the statement on social reform prepared by Rai Bahadur P. Anand Chudley were five. 1. Early marriage. 2. Remarriage of widows. 3. Liberty for our countrymen to travel or sojourn in foreign lands. 4. Women's rights of property. And 5. Education for women. Of this program, he achieved a great part. If he did not achieve all, there were the odds against him which should never be forgotten. A clever, determined, and an insincere intelligentsia came forward to defend orthodoxy and give battle to Ranade. The scenes were exciting as those of a dread grim of battle. And battle it was. One cannot recall the spirit of the time when this controversy over social reform was raging in this country. It is not possible for decency to enter into the abuses that were hurled, the calumnies that were uttered, the strategies that were employed by the orthodox section against the social reformers. It is impossible to read the writing of those who supported orthodoxy in their opposition to the Age of Consent Bill without realizing the depth of the degradation to which the so-called leaders of the people had fallen. The bill aimed to punish a husband who would have sexual intercourse with his wife if she had not attained the age of 12. Could any sane man, could any man with a sense of shame oppose so simple a measure? But it was unopposed, and Ranade had to bear the brunt of the mad orthodoxy. Assuming that Ranade's achievements were small, who could take pride or exultation in his failure to achieve more? There was no cause for exultation. The decline of social reform was quite natural. The odium for social reform was too great, the appeal of political power too alluring. The result was that social reform found fewer and fewer adherents. In course of time, the political platform of the Social Reform Conference was deserted, and men flocked to the Indian National Congress. The politicians triumphed over the social reformers. I am sure that nobody will now allow that their triumph was a matter of pride. It is certainly a matter of sorrow. Ranade may not have been altogether on the winning side, but he was not on the wrong side, and certainly never on the side of the wrong, as some of his opponents were. The end.